So, welcome everyone to Artists Empowering Artists, presented to you by Youth for Change. My name is Neel Dani, and it's my pleasure to be your host and facilitator for this series where the title says it all, really. We're artists empowering other artists to pursue their passions and their interests and to excel at it as well. Just a little bit about Youth for Change before we get started. Youth for Change is a nonprofit public organization which encourages the younger generation to step out of their comfort zone to help create and add value to their own lives as well as the societies at large. They're here to help the youth make a change and a difference in the world. Youth for Change partners with communities to develop the well being of the youth. They put the young people at the front of innovation and growth and encourage the youth in continuous participation and involvement in decision making, which has an aiding impact in organizing, planning, and delivery. With the support of experienced professionals like us, we provide the right direction to help the younger generation develop new skills and build a sustainable future. So thank you so much to Youth for Change for putting this together and having us all here to speak a little bit. Today is the producer edition of Artists Empowering Artists, and I'm super excited to welcome back a good friend of mine who is an awesome DJ that you may have seen if you tuned into earlier sessions, or rather our last session, as well as a guest who is a friend of a friend that is now a friend of mine as well. We have some awesome producers here, and I'm super excited to introduce them. First off, we have the one and only DJ Magic Mike, but as Misiu today. Misiu, who is his producer name, and we're going to hear a little bit more about that. We also have Arthur Boomin, and he's here with us in Mike's screen there. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing about their approaches to production and getting a little bit of insight on how they do things. One of the cool things about today's session, if you guys did tune into the DJ edition, Magic Mike is an awesome DJ, an awesome magician, but he's also a producer. And one of the reasons I thought it was really cool to bring him back is not only because he's awesome, but also because it gives you guys who are viewing this a chance to see how sometimes the categories can kind of cross when you're in music, right? It's not just that if you're a musician, you're only going to play an instrument and never venture into something else. I know that kind of contradicts what I said in the first session where I said build a skill set and then branch out. But we're at a little bit of a different stage in our musical journey than someone who may just be getting started. So at that point, once you do build a skill set, you can definitely branch out, and that's going to give you more skill sets that you can either use towards your own art or even as a service to other people's art. And one of those paths is the path of a music producer, which may not be an artist and may not be a DJ and may not be an engineer, but can also encompass all of those things as well. So a music producer is a pretty broad topic, and it's something that a lot of people may be confused with. We're going to get more into that as we go through, but I just want to give this little introduction to kind of give you guys an idea if you're thinking, what is a music producer? What do they do? The tough thing about describing exactly what a music producer does is it can be so many different things. But traditionally, music producers were the people that were involved in the overall creative product, the overall final product creatively. Before, producers like George Martin, who worked with the Beatles, were responsible for different things than producers today might be, or it could be exactly the same. So a producer like George Martin worked with the group, like the Beatles. They provided different instrumentation and kind of coached the artist and coached and guided the overall artistic vision. So things like hiring other musicians was the job of George Martin or a music producer. Hiring the session musicians that you need, hiring the orchestra that you may need on a song like Eleanor Rigby, those string players. George Martin was very good with strings and orchestration. So adding that element, his strength of being an orchestrator and a trained musical ear, he was able to add an element of depth to those Beatles records. There's other great producers too, Rick Rubin and Max Martin. And there's so many names that you can go check out. But as we get more to today, you hear names of producers like Metro Boomin, and you hear the names of similar producers as well, who are known more for making the beats. That's one big distinction in a traditional producer approach and a modern day producer approach, and what people think of them as. Today, a lot of times when you hear the word producer, it's the person that made the beat or the person that made the instrumental that the artist is then going to sit their song on top of. It doesn't mean that that's all a producer does. Some of those producers may have more traditional roles, like coaching the artist, giving different creative ideas, um, even being the artist themselves. For example, like Calvin Harris, who started his career making all his instrumentals, but singing on top of them as well. Now he does a little bit less singing and more of the real music producer aspect, where he's playing the instruments, he's putting the whole instrumental together, and then working with the artist as well to create something that's kind of both their vibes put together. And you can hear this with anybody he's worked with really. Frank Ocean, The Weeknd, Migos, kind of takes his own vibe. You know, it's very characteristically him, but then he also adds the other artist's style to it as well. So kind of overall seeing the creative vision. I'm gonna stop talking by myself now and bring our other producer friends in, but just to give you a little bit of an idea that you may have heard, oh, the person that made the beat is the producer. Well, you're right. Or the person that coached the artists, brought in the session musicians, and all of that is the producer. You're still right. There's multiple definitions of what a producer is and can be and does, and different strengths that different producers have that they can bring to the table to make something that is a really cool piece of art for the consumer, for them, for the actual artist they're working with, for everybody. So let's bring our producers on board. I'd like to welcome to the chat DJ Magic Mike, aka Misiu, and Arthur Boomin. How's it going, guys?
Thank you for having us. I gotta add Diplo to that list.
Oh man, yeah.
That's one of my favorite producers right there. And you got him, making music as Diplo. You got him making music as Major Lazer, uh, Jack U with Skrillex, and then he's making music for Beyonce or Sia,
Yeah.
and it's just the man is nonstop.
Yeah,
So
and like he
a lot of things.
and he doesn't seem to age either, man. Like he just like I've Diplo's been around since like we were young, right? And like he's stayed the same. I've gotten older and bigger. Diplo's the same. Diplo's in great shape. Diplo's like
I
everything.
don't
He's
know how he does it with all that traveling, but he's a businessman too.
man, yeah, he really is, and he's a great example. So I'm really happy you brought him up. One of my favorite producers too. I had a huge Diplo phase at York, actually. Just
Yeah,
for the record, all of us here are from York University in Toronto, Ontario. Not anymore, but we're all graduates from York, from the York Music Program. So it's
and I
cool to
gotta
see that.
say, when I first saw Major Lazer, that was at York.
Yeah, yeah, Diplo was
First
there,
year
and
there, they did a show for us.
I missed it, and my cousin went, who was the guy on drums when we played that corporate event. My cousin went, and he called me from there. He's like, "Dude, Diplo's here. You're missing out." And this is when I was going through my Diplo phase, and I'm like,
Yeah,
I can't
it was
believe I
good.
let this slip away from me.
They have a good
Every
show though. If you ever get a chance to see them, they're
yeah,
one of the acts that really interacts with the crowd and gets them going.
really.
And I like that about them.
Yeah, Major Lazer. I love Major Lazer, and even Jack U. I like. You can hear the cool thing about it is you can hear the Diplo in all those things, right? And then I
True.
think Diplo and Skrillex is like peanut butter and jelly to me. You know what I mean? Like it works
Yeah.
so well. Skrillex is another producer that I really really like. So
Oh yeah. And
what?
as a good segue, I guess what I like is that they keep pushing and rather than making the same cookie cutter sound, they're always trying to make something new, right?
Mhm.
When Jack U first came on the market and released that song with Justin Bieber, that was a new sound. And
Yeah.
you heard the following year, hundreds of songs sounded exactly the same,
Yeah.
right? And these guys are not out here to try to make songs that, I mean, they are too, make songs that fit a formula because they know that works, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Hmm.
But they're more focused on trying to, progress things and make new sounds and things you haven't heard before that make you go, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I've taken the most out of what inspires me to
Yeah.
really make stuff that's unique and you haven't heard before.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I mean, like with Diplo, just going kind of back to that point for 1 second, the thing I really like about what he did is um like there's this day and age to make something that's absolutely new that no one has heard before is kind of hard,
It is
but
tough.
it's innovating even existing things to make new takes on them, right? That's
Yeah.
really like a really big
Or
thing.
adding your own personality to it.
Yeah, and one of the cool things that I love that Diplo did is, he's like an American, super American dude, but his first things that he put out or his base was Brazilian music from like the slums of Brazil, from the favelas. So he
Yeah.
would go to these places and he'd learn their musical style and what their conventions are, and then bring that back and apply that formula to the American formula and just make
He's
really,
given a
really cool
platform
stuff.
to music that like could be crazy huge in certain locations, but like the rest of the world hasn't had a chance to experience.
Yeah.
They did that with their recent album, but they went, I believe, somewhere in Africa, and
Hmm.
same thing, just this crazy culture there of music that outside of Africa no one's ever heard,
Yeah.
and they're giving it a platform and giving those people a way to speak and show their culture.
Yeah, and I personally, that's one of my favorite things. Like, I got really into world music at York. I ended up doing ethnomusicology as my focus, and it was just so I can learn, West African music, South Indian music, so much different stuff, Australian music, and the thing that I love and I'm inspired by him by is that's what I would love to do, down the road is like go make different almost concept albums, or one is like more African inspired or
Yeah.
West African inspired, I would say particularly, then go and do one that has more of an Indian vibe, and just try to apply all those different things to my own
Oh yeah. I
sound.
think it all comes down to that music is about collaboration. It's about
Hmm.
creating music with the people around you. That's it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's well said, and that's why it kind of sucks right now for musicians, because even
Yeah.
for me, collaborating with people is so much more. I do a lot of stuff by myself, but I would say I have a lot more fun when I do things with other people,
Oh yeah.
and I'm just more creative in a positive way, where when I'm by myself, I pick at everything a lot, right? So anything I do, I'll be like, oh, I need to do it more like this or more like that. I
Yeah.
need to do this better. But as soon as I hear someone else's idea, I love it. You know what I mean? Like if someone else does something, I'll be like, oh, that's sick. Yeah, that's perfect.
It's a
If
new
I was to
perspective.
do that same thing, I probably wouldn't like it, But as soon as someone else does it, I'm like, I'm down.
Yeah. When you work on music yourself, it's easy to get caught in the same routine and uh, you know, rituals that you're used to. And
Yeah,
having someone else there gives a fresh perspective that might give you that kick, that inspiration to go off of.
exactly.
Sometimes, as I was mentioning last time, I've done some teaching courses,
Hmm.
and a big focus right now is self-expression. Um, oh, I forget where I was going with this.
Self-expression.
But what was I saying right before that?
You were taking teaching courses about
Right before
self-expression.
that.
Taking teaching courses, and it was about collaboration and ideas, new perspective on things.
Yeah, it'll come back. I
It's all good,
don't know
no
why I
worries.
just suddenly pooped.
Just sometimes, like I'll do that too, where you're just saying something and it just drops, But I
What's that
I think
office
that
quote?
it's
You just start saying a sentence and you're hoping it'll find itself by the end.
yeah, but it never does, It's just it's gone by that time. But it's
Yeah.
all good. You know what? I think that you guys are absolutely right though, that, finding a new perspective is something that when you're working by yourself, it's really hard, which is why a lot of producers do end up collaborating with other people or do end up, it's just more fun. It's more of that really
Oh
good
yeah.
vibe that we started music for in the first place, because that collective enthusiasm, right, brings out new things. But to move on from that, just wanted to ask you guys a question, because a music producer is such a kind of loaded term, and different people could have a different idea of what that means. I would just ask you, like, and this could be just more opinion based, but what is a music producer to you personally?
Honestly, if you're producing music, aka creating music in some way, composing it, uh, I would consider you a music producer. The only maybe thing I would add to that is, in my opinion at least, music producers generally technology based. So you're working with computers, programs, software, stuff like that. Um, but that doesn't stop you from producing it in other ways.
Hmm.
But a music producer overall is someone who is taking sounds and stuff, putting them together into the song. And whether you're mixing and mastering music or you're composing it, I think that all kind of falls under the umbrella as producer in a way. Engineer as well, but
Yeah. And so, see, that's why I'm asking you, and thanks for bringing that up. This is why it's tough to exactly label a music producer, because it encompasses so many things. Because I'm just going to give the viewers a personal example. So for myself, I mean, I do multiple different things. So I am an engineer, which means that I mix music and I master music, but I'm also a musician as a performer where I play instruments live or on stage or sing. But then I'm also a producer in the sense that I compose tracks and make instrumentals and create beats and add different sounds. So when when you put all those things together, they're all different things, but when I produce music, I can have different roles now. I can either go to an engineer and have them mix the song, or I can produce the song and I can mix it. You can still be a producer without being an engineer, and have someone else mix it. But what makes you the producer is you're kind of guiding that vision of how that mix is going to be, even if you're not physically doing it, adjusting the volumes and what speaker what's going to come out of and all that. You're still guiding the overall process by saying, I want this to sound like this, and I want this to be here, and this to fade in like that, and do a filter sweep over here. So you may not be physically doing it, which is what the engineer technically does, but you still might be a producer. You might be
yeah,
composing the track, making the instrumental. You still may be the producer. So it's a lot of times producers start off with a different skill set, which is kind of why this happens. A lot of people don't just start in music and say, "Okay, I'm going to be a producer," and I don't, from day one. And tell me, guys, if I'm wrong, but a lot of times it's because you're already in music and you may be doing something, and then you find, "Oh, I this might be something I like to do." In this day and age, it may be a little different because the whole beat making thing is very accessible. But
yeah,
for a lot of people who started out a little earlier, typically you had some other starting point that then brought you to music production.
for sure,
Would,
yeah.
would you say that's the case for you guys?
Definitely. I've been doing music most of my life because my dad's a music teacher. So it was the kind of natural progression of coming up with songs on the guitar and then wanting to I was big into electronic music, so wanting to create that and then
Mm-hmm.
finding the software, which back then wasn't as easy as today. Today you have all sorts of free programs you can use, free trials. The programs themselves are really not that expensive in terms of what you're investing into,
Mm-hmm.
and you can make crazy stuff.
Yeah.
If you're on Mac, you got Logic. Um, PC and Mac, you have FL Studio, Ableton, all sorts of things, and it really don't get caught up as well on trying to pick the right one for you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Just grab one and start going.
Mm-hmm.
I
That's a
started
good
off
point
with
too.
FL Studio. And then when I went to university, did digital media, I learned Reason. That was what they were teaching there. And then from Reason, we went on to Ableton. So I'm familiar with all of them. FL Studio is still my go to because that's when I have an idea in my head, I just want to get it down. That's what I'm most comfortable with. I'll
Mhm.
still use Ableton for specific things that it does better than FL Studio, for example. And you
Mhm.
can jump back and forth, but the main thing is to start.
Yeah, that's and Arthur Boomin, let's hear from you. I know we talked a little bit about this like just before, but how did you have your start with like how did you get into production and how did you kind of go
Well,
down that
actually,
road?
I have a similar background. My mom also is a music teacher at a school,
Oh,
and
no
she
way.
teaches vocal to elementary students. And growing up in a musical household, I grew up learning how to play the violin and piano. And after the lesson or after practicing piano, I kind of would just sit at the piano and kind of create my own melodies. And I didn't have a computer back then, so what I did was I'd write the notes or the letter names on a paper, and that's how I would like make my first production by composing music the old-fashioned way of just pencil, paper, and sitting at the piano.
No
Then
way.
in
That's
an
awesome.
grade nine, my mom signed me up for this summer course offered at Cardinal Carter Music Academy. It was like an after. It was a. It was like an afternoon program at learning how to make music using computers, and they taught on GarageBand, which is
Hmm.
like what the free software that you get when you buy the computer. And we were taught how to make our own music projects. And I started like combining violin because violin is my background. I started putting violin and strings in my music. And fast forward a couple of years, I finally get my own MacBook. I started producing music on Logic, and I made electronic music, and I was putting violins, and that was kind of my sound. So when I kind of switched my production to hip hop and beat making, that kind of stuff, uh, playing the violin and adding strings is a unique sound that not a lot of producers continue. And what I try to do when I make production is I always try to add a little bit of violin or a little bit of cello or something like that, so that when people listen to the beat, they can just be like, oh, that sounds like an Arthur Boomin track because it's got the violins in it.
That's awesome, man. That's good. And yeah,
True,
that's
man.
what's
You
really
hear one of his songs now, it's like, boom, that's Arthur Booming right away.
that's
I feel like
awesome.
that's one thing that a lot of people try to strive for is finding your own sound and honing down on that.
For sure, especially as a producer, right? Because with a singer and an artist, they have their voice, which is so much more easily identifiable. Because
Yeah.
let's say you get Logic, for example, right? Like I am a Logic user. You're gonna have access to all the Apple sounds that are a lot of times the same exact sounds that are in GarageBand. So
Right.
if you're using GarageBand or you're using Logic, there are a lot of sounds available, but it's pretty common that people are going to be pooling within those same sounds, right? If you want your kick or your snare, you're probably going to just pick it from that list, or sometimes people will export third-party samples in, but if you're just starting out, you're probably going to use one of those things that are already given to you for free. So that's already a challenge of identifying or making your own sound, right? That the sounds that you're going to use, unless you create them from scratch or tweak presets really heavily, they're going to kind of be they're going to be already used by other people. So now how do you go and stand out past that to making it sound like you? Well, you can use certain types of effects that other people may not use, that may be a little more unconventional, or you may be able to do automation, which for those of you who don't know, automation can be like programming the software to do a volume drop at this point, or to change the direction of where the speaker is coming from, or add more of the effect. Those are just examples. You can automate basically anything.
Yeah.
Um,
And there's
but
nothing wrong with using, sounds that everyone else uses.
Mhm,
Don't get too caught up with that as well when you start.
exactly.
Because keep in mind, so many songs use guitar and piano and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And those all sound the same at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So it's not so much what you're using it as much as what you're doing to it, right? Which is what you're talking about. The effects you put on it, the automation, the
Yeah.
melody,
Or
everything. Your
even
personality is where that comes out, right?
exactly. And I think that, with Arthur Boom, in the case of that, he may be using a lot of those, same things that all of us are using, the resources that we all have, but What is he doing to transform it to him? Well, he's using his background and his experience of using string instruments and putting them in a track that a lot of times, if people wanted some strings, they might just use samples. But even that, playing the actual instrument is going to give him a different end result than someone who's just using samples. It's going to give him different details, which are then going to translate overall into his sound. And I think that's really cool. So something to think about for all of you out there. If you have a strength in something or you have a background, try to incorporate you into your songs, whether that's your culture, whether that's a strength you may have, whether that's an interest you may have, whether that's an instrument you already play, a style of music you like. Uh, the
A sample
stage is
you make
open.
yourself will always be better than a sample you find online.
Mhm. And
Get
much
creative
more.
with it. If you want to kick, you know, record yourself kicking a box or something, right? Bang pots and stuff together. I have songs where I've clinked on different glasses and then use those to create a sound with it. Get creative with it, which also helps, you know, your inspiration flow.
Mhm.
Makes your sounds more unique to everyone else. And don't even worry about you know, microphones and stuff. At this point, your phone has a good enough microphone. You see vloggers and stuff vlogging on just their iPhone,
Yeah,
and the sound quality is great. So don't even get wrapped up on needing like the latest things or a good microphone or something. Use what you got.
yeah.
I
I
have
think
a
that's
lot
a
of
really
songs
good
that
point.
sound great, and they were recorded off my phone.
I think
So
that's a really good point, actually, because a lot of times when you start diving into this, you're going to realize that there's a lot of things that even after you get the software, right? Let's say you get, and it's called a DAW or a digital audio workstation. So let's say you get Ableton Live and you go all out and you get like the full version, or let's say you get Logic Pro. These are all going to come with a certain amount of sounds. But then when you start working through it, you're going to realize, oh, maybe you want to find a tutorial on YouTube, and then you try to find a certain, like what plugins you should use. Then you're going to realize that other people make plugins that everybody is ranting and raving about and saying, oh, you know, the stock plugins are good until you start, and then you should go with these plugins. So then you might start looking at those plugins and saying, oh, I can't do anything good because I don't have the best plugins. Then you're going to say, oh, but I can't do anything because I don't have the best sounds. And then you're going to say, oh, I can't do anything because I don't have the best microphones. And then you're just going to buy a bunch of stuff and not know how to do anything. So the main
I've been caught
focus,
up in that before too.
and we've
Music,
all been there, you
I
know, and
gotta
that's,
buy this or I won't be good.
yeah,
music equipment is expensive. It's an expensive hobby.
it is an expensive hobby. And
But it's
for
not a
me,
necessary hobby.
it really isn't. And I love it a little bit too much. Like as soon as gear comes out, I want it. And
Oh
whether I
yeah,
use it or not in my productions is a whole nother story. When I want all these things, but they're not actually going to make you better. What's going to make
right.
you better is your consistent use of whatever software you're going to use. Even if you go buy
Not,
all the softwares,
not
I
that.
would recommend focus on one in the beginning. You know, give them a try in the beginning if you have access to multiple versions, or let's say you bought a keyboard and it came with a trial version or a light version. Try everything out and see what resonates with you most, but you're not really going to know until you spend a certain amount of hours in there and get used to where everything is. I think one of the most important things as a producer or even an engineer is knowing your DAW so that you know how to access the things that you want to access. When I spend a lot of time in Logic Pro and then I go over to Ableton, I'm so used to Logic Pro where it takes me a second to remember, oh yeah, Ableton,
Yeah.
all these things are at the bottom that I have to look out for. Logic Pro, you know, just little things. But um,
And keep in mind too, a lot of these producers we brought up earlier, Diplo, Skrillex, and stuff. A lot of these guys are producing their songs on the airplane.
yeah,
Right? These guys are traveling from place to place. They don't get much time to sit in studios. They're producing just headphones and laptop, and they're going away. And sometimes like a little keyboard,
yeah.
portable keyboard. Like I got one here. It's a popular one, right?
Nice. Oh yeah, that's like one of the heavy hitters there, the MK
Easily
Mini,
fits in a
right? M
bag, and works great. So like we're saying, you don't need all these fancy things. A laptop, a decent pair of headphones, and then maybe a keyboard, and you're producing. And these guys are doing this stuff on the plane, and then once they get to a studio later, that's when they're tweaking all the sounds specifically to the way they like it. But this is great because at this day and age now, you can do this anywhere. Used to be that you needed like big PCs and big boards and stuff to record things, and you can even do it from your phone these days.
Yeah.
There's a FL Studio Mobile, and you can just produce on the go on your phone. There's no excuses these days that you can't get into this.
That's also very true and a very good point as well. And
What, I can add something.
yeah, please, yeah.
You know, learning a DAW is one thing, but also learning a bit of theory will also excel in your production making, right? Because you can't learn how to you can't there's a way of saying it. You can't break the rules unless you know the rules. You know, so
This
you
is
know
like
it's
wisdom
always
right here.
good to do a little bit of theory lessons and like learn a bit of piano. And there's so much stuff on YouTube that's free content. All you got to do is watch a 3-second ad, and you can have all these teaching materials and learning materials on how to play a little bit of piano. And there's even apps now, like Muse to Go, or like learning how to play guitar. And there's like an app on how to which notes to play and which fingers to use and that kind of stuff, right?
Mhm.
So definitely, when you want to make music production, learn a little bit of theory, and that will also keep you from what's the way of saying it? Like it will motivate you to do better and motivate you to make more music. Because if you don't know theory and you don't know what you're doing when you buy this little MIDI keyboard and you don't know what to do with it, you're gonna be kind of brought down. You're gonna feel kind of bad. You're not gonna, you know. Can you continue?
A
Yeah,
musical,
you're not gonna know. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
yeah, a musical ear is developed through practice. So expose yourself to as much music as you can, and like Arthur is saying, theory helps you develop an understanding of what sounds nice together, what doesn't sound nice together,
Mhm.
consonants, dissonance, stuff like that, and that helps in your music production later. And what Arthur is trying to say is, back when we were in school, this is stuff that you could just learn in school or pay tons of money to go to university for. And these days, you can go on YouTube and learn how to play on the piano just off of YouTube tutorials.
Mhm.
So, everything is there for you.
It's true, yeah. Like we are in a pandemic, and it's been tough. But the great thing for learning and for staying connected, and even like this, is that we have the technology and we have the resources to learn and access information and talk to each other from the comfort and safety of our own homes, and you know do all these things because we have the technology and the resources. When we were growing up, even before when we were in high school, I didn't have any of this stuff. I could have bought a Mac, but I didn't even know that it wasn't like it was now. And
Yeah.
I think the reason a lot of producers have an extra skill set, or a starting point from before becoming a producer, is because that skill set is super important in a lot of cases. Like for us, we take advantage, or take for granted, I mean, of how much training we've actually had with music, I'm sure. And we were playing instruments and learning theory for years and years before we ever went and started working in a DAW. And for myself too, a lot of electric guitar playing. So I was already comfortable with pedals and what different effects sounded like and did, right? So the order of effects and what kind of effects to use and what effects sound like what, because I was already comfortable with that and already comfortable with playing and comfortable with theory and chord progressions and all that stuff, it was easier to dive in. I don't know how I would have dived into that whole world without knowing any of that stuff.
Oh yeah.
And one thing that I like to share with students when they're doing lessons or we're just going through sessions is theory. Without theory, it's kind of like you're walking through a forest and you're just in the dark. And then you learn a little bit of theory, and it's like you have a little flashlight now that you can kind of see your way a little bit. And then you learn a little more theory, and now you got another flashlight. Then you learn a little bit more theory, and you also got one of those lights on your head. And then you learn a ton of theory, and it's like the whole place lit up. And now you can see everything, you understand everything that's going on around you, as opposed to not knowing theory and just you're walking in pitch darkness through a forest. And there could be a cliff, there could be a pond. You never know what there could be because you don't have any light to guide you.
And funny enough, to go back to that thing I forgot, kind of relates here, but when I was taking those courses, it was about self-expression, and how sometimes if you just let the students roam completely free, they're not going to know what to do, right? It's not bad to sometimes give them not a restriction, but like a suggestion, some kind of box to work within, so that then they can think outside of that, if that makes sense, right? So, for example, when you're working on music, when I was in university, got given, for example, assignments where you're only allowed to make a song with samples that you make yourself, right? Or you're given one sound, and using that one sound, you have to create a whole song. So you got to use that sound to create percussion, drums, and then you got to use that same sound to create some kind of melody and everything else that goes into a song.
And you got to
And
do that in your course?
yeah,
That's awesome.
so those kind of assignments helped me to think outside of the box by being in a box, right? Because I had a lot of restrictions. I couldn't use any other samples except the ones I made myself, which forced me to get creative with how am I going to create these sounds. And the end result sometimes is really cool. The end result sometimes is really bad. But the process of getting there helps you develop skills that you're going to use later. Since that assignment, to this day, I now, whenever I can, create samples myself because I know I can do it because of that assignment, right? So just a bit of a segue there, but it doesn't hurt to learn theory and learn all of these rules. So like Arthur said, you can then break them and go outside of it.
Yeah, this is all really good stuff, guys. Thanks a lot for sharing this input. This is stuff that I think is super useful whether you're a beginner or even quite a bit more experienced, because these are all tips and these are all gems that kind of come from years of experience. Until you go through the motions of this stuff, uh, it doesn't really click the same way, I guess, that we have an understanding of it now. So take this advice, use it to its full uh, potential, because this can save you potentially years of learning, which is never a bad thing. But if you can speed up the process for yourself, why not, right? Um, that's really great. And one other thing that I wanted to talk about with you guys is a little bit about DAWs, because people, if you're not too familiar with it, may be kind of confused of, oh, what do I get? Like, even though I know you had mentioned, Mike, you said, don't worry about which one you get, just get something. Um, Maybe even if we just kind of give a quick perspective on what we use and why we like to use it, or how we ended up starting with that,
Definitely,
it
yeah.
might help some people out.
Yeah.
Just before we get started with our personal ones, there's a whole bunch of software that you guys can use to actually create music, from free apps on your phone to GarageBand on your iPad. And one thing I actually wanted to mention about the iPad that I will later on. GarageBand on your iPad, on your phone, free music making apps. But then there's the standard professional music making software or music production software, which people call digital audio workstations. So the one that is probably most standardized in the industry is called Pro Tools. That's made by a company called Avid. And before, uh, this is what most people had to use, because it's still in all the studios. If you go to a studio, they run Pro Tools. So a lot of times this ended up just being the one that people would use. Uh,
And that's the one I
Usually,
would say is more focused on live recording and playback and stuff,
yeah,
rather than the other ones we're going to mention, which is more based inside the software, all the sounds that are in the software.
If you want to go the old-fashioned route of composing music for like instruments like an orchestra, and not necessarily like make EDM music or hip hop, and you want to make classical music
Or
there's
rock music,
or rock music,
that kind of stuff.
there's also Finale, which is like a score program. So it's a program when you play the melodies on a piano, for instance. If you know piano, you can record them as notes on a staff, and then print it out and give it to your friends that play instruments for them to play it, and you can kind of create like quartets or like
That's a good
trios or
one to mention.
stuff
Yeah.
like that. If
yeah,
people out there that are interested in classical music, right?
that's a really good idea. Yeah, like let's say we have the technology, but there may be some people out there who still love the traditional aspect of, orchestrating and scoring by hand, because the approach is really different. If you know heavy music theory, you might just go that route because you're faster at it, or it makes more sense to you, or you don't need to mess around with, if you're not super into tech, but you're good with theory and a piece of paper and a pen, then you might like that. The thing is, you can still be a music producer because you're going to create these melodies, you're going to orchestrate this whole thing, and then you can give it to people that you know that can play it for you, and then you can record those people and have an engineer mix it down. So there's so many possibilities as soon as you find out what your strength is, what your niche is, and then you capitalize on that niche.
There's there's also I think Logic has a video integration, so you can make music to an animation or to a video clip or to a video game or to whatever it is, and you can actually make music as you're watching the video. So you can kind of score some kind of instrumental or an orchestration to the video or the music or the picture or whatever it is, right?
Yeah, I can add to that because I actually did some of that in university. Had to score a couple movie scenes and stuff like that and understand how music works in movies, which if you're ever interested, look into that. That's a huge kind of area that you can branch. That's it, that you can go into with all this music production, is producing music for movies, right? You ever look at it, music changes the whole scene. There's examples on YouTube where they show the scene without music and then show it with music or a different song. And the type of song completely changes the mood, everything. Music is a very important, often overlooked aspect of movies.
Think of music in horror films. Imagine watching the horror film with no sound at all.
It's
like it wouldn't be all scary, no?
It's not scary anymore, right?
It's not scary anymore, exactly. But you have the intensity of the strings, or when the knife comes out, there's like those screeching sound of the strings,
or the Jaws theme,
or the Jaws theme. Everybody knows, right? Da-dum, da-dum, dun 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 dun. Everybody knows that theme. Everybody remembers it, right?
Or a little more relevant now, Star Wars. You know, you got Luke's theme, you got Darth Vader's theme, where it's so ingrained in our minds now that even if you just heard it somewhere, you're immediately thinking, boom, that's Darth Vader, or that's Superman, Harry Potter. All these movies, not only do you love them for what they are, but you hear that theme song, first few notes, you know right away, and you're sucked right back into that moment when you were watching that
Game
movie.
of Thrones.
Game of Thrones.
Yeah, it's true. And you know what? This is a really. I'm happy we kind of went into film and composition. So this becomes more what people would refer to as a composer, especially if you go into film. But it crosses over a lot with production because what are you doing? You're making tracks, you're making beats, and a lot of these modern day composers are very much producers. So when you think of composers, and well, just to mention, kind of go off what we were speaking about, The Lord of the Rings, for me, the music in that movie is like unbelievable. And even now, if I hear it, like I can hear it in my head right now, there's a theme from the Shire, which is where the hobbits all live. And it has like this really nice flute. It's just so good.
I know
like,
the one you're talking about. I went through a phase where I just listened to the soundtrack. Yeah.
Right, it's so good. And so Howard Shore did the music for the majority of that, I'm pretty sure. And then another huge name that you have to mention if you're mentioning film music, at least in the West, Hans Zimmer. He's right. He's huge.
Interstellar.
There's John Williams,
and of course John Williams, who did the Star Wars, most of the superhero movies,
Harry Potter,
and yeah, Harry Potter, and you know what? One of the guys that I got to mention these days that I am really inspired by as well is Ludwig Göransson. I don't know if you, but he's the reason I love him is he's a composer, but he's a producer. He produced the track Redbone for Childish Gambino.
Yeah.
Unbelievable producer. He has this thing that if you guys go on YouTube, like he breaks down how he made the track. He's like playing all the stuff, ridiculous guitar player. So he made the songs for Childish Gambino for Redbone. It's because he met Childish Gambino when he was in Community, and he did the music for the show Community.
No way.
And and now he's like he did the music for Black Panther.
Wow.
Like it's crazy, and he's like in the studio or like conducting the orchestra. So it's really cool.
Redbone. That's cool.
So And he's like,
And like you mentioned, those videos on YouTube, that's another great resource to take advantage of. Is so many producers these days have YouTube videos of how they break down their songs. Like
yeah,
a very popular one these days is Billie Eilish. Her brother
Phineas, man,
Phineas
Phineas is
produces so much of her stuff
unbelievable.
as well as his own, and he has so many videos of him breaking down what he did. You
Yeah,
can see what he's using. He's showing what VSTs he's using, which is the virtual synthesizers that create sounds. And a lot of rap dudes too are breaking down, um, the producers more so breaking down like their popular beats
hmm,
of songs that are popular now.
yeah.
So definitely take advantage of that too.
Yeah, I think that's great because you can see what style of production resonates more with you. Like a lot of people, you'll see them, especially in the hip hop world, using these things called MPCs, which are like these big square controllers with pads on them. They're very cool, but that's not my particular method of producing all the time. So I'll watch it and I'll be very interested in it and inspired by it in a different way, more like admire the process because I don't do it as much. But someone like Ludwig Göransson, he's in the studio with stuff all around him and, going to the roads and playing the roads and going to the guitar, playing the guitar. And then adding stuff in the computer as well. That's kind of more my vibe. Same thing. Calvin Harris does the same thing, where he kind of just
Yeah.
writes on YouTube how I made slide, how I made this, and he just
Yeah.
shows you all the.
He was doing like Instagram stories for a while there where he just quick clips. So even if
Yeah,
you got a short attention span, he's
yeah,
just like boom, boom, boom. And then there you go, the whole song.
and that's the whole song. So it's really cool to see because it may inspire you to just to see someone who's doing that who kind of you're doing the same kind of thing as, or you find a new inspiration and you say, oh, I didn't even know that you can do it like this and just use the MPC. And so there's so many different ways of actually producing as well. So going and seeing how other producers do it may really give you
Oh
a
yeah.
good jump start into
Okay.
finding your own way that works well.
Producing.
Yeah, well, you mentioned NPC, so just so people have an example, this isn't one, but this isn't the same idea. Is some kind of controller where you can trigger things on it.
Okay, so what's good about these kind of things as well is like for someone that perhaps doesn't know theory and doesn't know instruments and doesn't have the private education of learning these kinds of things. There's also what's called triggering samples, right? So you can basically make your own song by triggering different samples, and you can watch on YouTube. There's lots of guys out there that have these what's called an
Launchpad.
Ableton Launchpad, and they have different samples and they trigger them and they build their whole song like that. So if you don't know, let's say, theory and you don't know how to play an instrument, another option that's available for you is getting what's called a Launchpad, triggering, having mapping each of these buttons to a different sample, different sound, and playing those sounds and trying to mash up and kind of create your own version of a song or your own song entirely or a remix or something like that.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really good point. So theory, we are all very theory heavy, I would say, on the spectrum of, no theory to a lot of theory because we all did go to university for music and that's one of the mandatory things is that you get a very high degree of theory. I'm really happy and thankful that I have that because it really helps me just understand things better, but my process for making music hasn't really changed since before I went to university. I have relative pitch, so a lot of times I'll be playing stuff and I won't know what I'm doing, but I just do it and I know it sounds cool and then I'll think about it all later. The theory has kind of given me that understanding of, oh, this
This
is
is
why
why.
I like this. This is what I was doing and this is why it all worked out. So it helps me connect the dots, but when I still start making music, I'm not thinking I'm not probably not even thinking, just very
Yeah.
subconscious, kind of natural. But if you don't have a theory background, using something like the Launchpad or using something like the Ableton Push controller or Akai controllers that are just pad based, uh, that's probably a good. If you want to go that route, Ableton is probably a really good route for you using Ableton Live. It works really well in that software. Logic has an update now that also kind of has taken a little bit from Ableton in terms of the way that tracks work and things. But if you're if you're looking to do that and using a launchpad or using a triggering samples, look into Ableton. You can also look into a software called Bitwig Studio. Personally, I'd recommend Ableton because I have Ableton and I like it. So, but nothing against any other DAW for sure. They're all great. Everybody uses them. Different people have different preferences.
And we keep hammering the YouTube thing, but whatever DAW you do settle on, again, YouTube tutorials, anything you want to do. How do I do this? YouTube it. I'm sure there's at least 5 or 6 tutorials of how to do that thing.
Oh yeah. Like I don't think I've ever looked for something that I haven't found,
Like what?
like on YouTube. So
And in
it's
university, like they made us go through the manual and learn the program front to back. And I'm so grateful for that because it helped a lot.
mm.
But man, it would have been a lot less tedious to just use YouTube videos.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. YouTube videos, let's say you want a specific result. You want a quick, it's almost like a quick fix. Like you need to know how to do this one thing right now. YouTube is perfect for that because you will find it, you can follow along with the video, do the exact same things, click the same places. The manual, if you guys are willing to go that route, let's say you found a software that you want and you're willing to go through the manual, there is nothing like the manual if you
Oh,
really,
yeah.
really want to understand everything. That's one of the things I like about Logic is if you have an issue, you go to help, you type it in, and then it sends you to an online, like the link of that problem on the manual. So then you can read through the whole, section for the
Yeah.
particular thing you're having. So that's another reason I like Logic is it takes you to the manual, and every time I have a question, I end up reading more and more of the manual.
Yeah.
So
And
it's really
again, don't assume that you need to read the manual to understand the program.
no,
Just start the program and everything is gonna work out as you go through it. You're gonna learn as you do it. You come across, so I want to do this. How do I do it? And then you remember for next time.
yeah.
And it's not something that needs to be overwhelming. These programs have a high learning curve, but take it slow and steady, and before you know it, you know what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, don't think you need everything, and don't think you need to go through the whole manual. Like for me, my first software was a trial version of Cubase on my PC. I didn't have any idea of what I was doing. I used an EQ sometimes, but the tracks I recorded in, I would also do just tracks one take for the whole time because I guess I was much more musician at that point than
Yeah.
producer. So I was using the strengths I had to make these things happen. And looking back now, I'm like, how did these things even like I listened to them today, I'm like, oh, these things sound pretty good. Like they sound good, but I didn't
Yeah.
have any knowledge of the mixing. I didn't have any of that stuff. But given what I had, I used what I had and made it work. And even looking back now after having much more experience, I look back and say, oh wow, it was actually really good. So don't stop yourself just because you don't know. You're gonna learn by doing.
And also don't get caught up if you're not making stuff that sounds like a masterpiece right away.
Oh
Keep in
yeah.
mind that every producer that you love that's created a song that you can't stop listening to, for every song like that, that producer's got 100 songs that no one's ever going to hear, right? A lot
Mhm.
of this ends up just being experimental ideas that never come to fruition. Or, you made a really cool loop, but then you just couldn't ever make it into a song.
Yeah.
All of that is a normal part of the process. And don't get too caught up on trying to make everything good right in the beginning because you're going to keep learning and keep getting better. And
Yeah.
my analogy for it is like polishing a turd, right? If you have something that isn't necessarily good, and I had to learn this the hard way, is I had songs that I've been working on for years that I've been trying so hard to make good, but the truth is they're just bad songs to begin with. And no matter how much you polish, a piece of turd and make it look nice, at the end of the day, it's still a piece of shit.
Mhm.
So um, don't worry, don't get too wrapped up on what you're making and just keep making more and more. And eventually you'll make that thing that sounds good right from the bat
Mhm.
and keep working on that.
I'm just gonna add that when I make music, for every like 3, 4 beats that I make, the fifth one is the masterpiece.
No
So like
way.
even to this day, after producing for like 10 years, like for every like 3, 4 songs that I make a really good one. And it's not every time you make a beat, it's not going to be the best. You know, it's never going to be the best every single. Like, I don't know a producer that every single beat he makes is like a hit. There's no
No,
way.
Yeah,
There's no way. You know,
maybe Diplo.
maybe Diplo.
maybe
Okay,
Diplo. Yeah,
Because the amount of music he pumps out, like, I don't think he has time for bad songs.
but
that's a
still,
good
like,
point. Yeah.
even for myself, even for Michael, even for a lot of my friends that are producers as well, I
Mm.
know that for every like couple tracks they make, one stands out, and you're like, wow, this is the best one that I've made. And then you make another 3-4 tracks that are kind of like, okay, and then again, oh, this is a masterpiece, right? So
Mm.
the more you produce, the more good tracks that you're gonna make. So just keep producing, you know, and you're gonna get better at that craft.
Yeah.
And one kind of method to jumpstart that I've used in the past is to make a song every day. I went through a phase a month or two where I pushed myself to make a song every day. I didn't care if it was good or bad. It was just the fact that I would sit down and work on something. And you know what? Some of my favorite songs right now that I'm planning to release came out of those sessions, right?
Wow.
Some were bad and never got to see the light of day, but it's motivation doesn't always happen. It's never going to be where you just feel motivated to work on music. You're going to have days where you got to push yourself and have discipline to do it. Music is supposed to be creative, but sometimes you got to push yourself to get to that creative point.
Music is definitely a form of self-expression, you know. So if you're feeling bad that day, try sitting at the computer and making a song or making a beat or something like that. I have countless times where music is a way for me to show my emotions through music, right? So
Or just work through them, understand
or just
them
work
better.
through them. Exactly. If you're having a bad day, just sit at the computer and just make something, or sit at the piano and play something, you know. So which is great.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, push yourself. You know, and this is a good one. That it's not it's not that you just sit and one day you have like this light bulb go off and it's like, oh, I have the best song. No, sometimes things can happen to spark that inspiration, but it's still gonna take you having discipline and pushing yourself to make it a final product that you kind of envisioned from the start. Just in terms of DAWs, like I'm interested to know what do you guys prefer to use? Like I know Mike, you said your go-to is FL Studio, which is really
So
cool because FL Studio for me, like I that's the one I probably have least experience with because I I just use other ones, you know. But I know that a lot of people love it, and this one is especially popular for hip hop producers. So
oh yeah,
what
Marty.
are your like? What do you like about it, and why would you recommend it to someone who's interested
I
in
mean,
potentially making hip hop beats?
so I used it because it's as far as, for example, Ableton is very simple interface, and that for a lot of people can make it harder to learn. Whereas
Mm,
FL Studio is very visually simple, right? What you're looking at is kind of very obviously what it is, and why I can see it being better for hip hop guys is for what's called the step sequencer. FL Studio has the step sequencer when you first open it, literally just a row of
little like a grid.
yeah, which you have your main drum samples, kick, snare, clap, and essentially you just press, and within
Wi-
seconds you got a beat going, right? So if you got a groove in your head, it's so quick to just boom, put it down, and then you can right away start working on, okay, I want a kick that sounds more like this, or a snare that sounds a little sharper, right? And you start building your song very quick. So I can see why it appeals especially for hip hop. Personally, for electronic music, it's great as well. It's just very easy to put down ideas, and that doesn't mean that the other programs aren't good at that. Personally, that's just the one I started off with and the one that stuck with me. Most people who have Macs will start with Logic because that's the program that works best on Mac. And all of these programs really boil down to the same thing. They all work the exact same way. They all just look different and maybe do a few things slightly differently. But don't get caught up too much on trying to pick one because they all, at the end of the day, do the same thing.
Yeah,
Ableton might be a little more powerful and do some warping that other ones can't do as easily. But that's also a very niche specific tool that I know not a lot of people use, especially for things like hip hop.
Yeah, I end up using Warp a lot, like, but I end up using it more either for educational purposes to slow down and speed up songs, which
Right.
now I don't have to do because YouTube, you could just set the playback speed. But before YouTube put that update in, that's
Yeah.
what mainly I would do it for. Like, let's say the song was too fast, I just draw it out, so that they have, or there's one part that's really hard. So I would just draw out that one section, and then the
Yeah.
rest of it was the same tempo kind of a thing. The
And
other
just so
thing that
listeners aren't confused, warping, you're essentially just taking the song and literally stretching or
compressing
compressing
it.
specific parts of it. So a lot of people use it to take a live um, sound or song and kind of put it in beat. Because sometimes when you're playing live, you're not really right on beat. You speed up or slow down. So that's the main reason I've heard it used for. There's a lot of ways to use it. FL Studio, the way you mentioned, to speed up or slow down a song. Most other programs will do that in their own way.
Mhm.
Ableton, the warping feature just allows you to really pinpoint how you want to do it. So
Mhm. Yeah, no, and it's that one. It's a really good point that you mentioned that, Mike. Like, don't if you're thinking, oh, I want Ableton so I can warp audio. That's not necessarily the reason you need it. Ableton, and feel free to add your input on this too. This is just kind of to give listeners or viewers an idea. Like, let's say they are really confused and they're like, oh, why would I get this as opposed to that? Well, first off, if you have a Mac, I would say just go ahead and get Logic because it's by far the cheapest.
agreed.
If you already have the
Guys
Mac.
who use Logic, Skrillex, Dead Mouse used it for a while. Some big guys.
Mhm.
FL Studio, rest in peace, Avicii. He was big. Like you
Oh,
said, a
was
lot
Avicii FL Studio?
of Avicii was FL Studio.
Really?
Some more electronic guys, Zed, Dead Mouse again, used it for a while. Ableton, you got Calvin Harris. That's what Dead Mouse uses now, Ableton. So you got the biggest guys in the world, and each one uses a different program.
Mhm.
So it really, you're not losing anything by picking one or the other.
Yeah, yeah. One thing that I would recommend to people as well is just to give you guys factors of, okay, this maybe might be a good one for you to try out because of what you do. Let's say you work a lot with audio. Um, I may suggest, and feel free to like let me know if I'm wrong or add in some points, guys. If you work a lot with audio, as in like you're not using the sounds from the computer, and you're using real sounds, I would probably recommend either Ableton or number one would maybe be Pro Tools.
I would
Um,
recommend Pro Tools, but Pro Tools is like the very professional. First of all, it's a very expensive software, and that would be maybe a progression to that point. I
yeah,
would recommend. But yes, for live
yeah.
stuff, Pro Tools definitely. Logic is
So
good for that.
yeah, so actually that's yeah, perfect that you mentioned that because that's what I wanted to bring up. So Pro Tools, as Mike mentioned, it is very expensive. One of the things that I don't like about using it on the go especially is you need a USB key called an iLock that you have to stick in your computer and take up a USB port in order to actually be able to use it. So that's one reason that I'm not a huge fan. I don't like the iLock because I like when I'm on the go to not take my USB port, all that
And
kind of stuff.
that's due
Um,
because people were trying to crack the software. So it's
yeah,
unfortunately a necessary thing, even though really in an ideal world you don't need that USB.
yeah, but I mean, because it was the standard, everybody was trying to get cracked copies, right? So I understand completely why they did it. But let's say if you're the kind of person who does have a Mac, I would say start with GarageBand because it's already on there. If you want to elevate past that, go to Logic. The thing that I personally love about Logic and audio is the takes feature, which for me is the one of the main reasons I use Logic, where when you're recording someone, you can pass through multiple takes, and GarageBand does this as well, but not as smoothly, where you can take multiple takes and then put all those takes together into one, what's called a composite take, or a comp track, which is like you take the best parts of all your takes, put them together. You can get the same final result in any software, but for example, when I use Ableton, if I'm tracking vocals, which means recording someone's vocals, I will always use Logic because Ableton doesn't give me that take feature. So
Yeah.
then I gotta go move around sound waves, try to line them up, and do all this stuff. Whereas with Logic, it's super easy. So one thing, if you are using a lot of audio and you do have a Mac, I would recommend Logic. If you're making hip hop beats or even EDM, as Mike mentioned, maybe check out FL Studio because that step sequencer is actually great.
The one
You can
problem is
get
that FL Studio is not for Mac. So if
It is for Mac now.
is it now?
It used to not be. He's right, but
Yeah.
it's available for Mac as of
Sorry.
this latest FL12.
oh no way. That's awesome. I might have to jump on a copy because step sequencers are cool. Like, and so for me, the reason I don't end up using step sequencers is because when I started, like a lot of my starting and the way I actually got into production was through live looping. So I
Yeah.
would actually use hardware for everything, and because I'm a drummer, I liked to play my stuff. So I got one of those Roland TR, like the 808s, the new one, the black and green one,
Oh yeah, I
and
like
you
that.
can it's amazing and you can play it as a step sequencer or as pads. So that's what I ended up using a lot and kind of getting most of my step sequencer
That's cool.
experience on. But they're really great, especially if you don't know too much with theory, but you know kind of where you want to place your different sounds. Really
Rhythm.
good for hip hop producers because you can get that so fast by just
Literally 30 seconds, you got that beat going.
and if you're EDM, you can get it very quickly, you know. So you're pretty good either way.
And then
But
dubstep, you got
yeah, exactly.
one drum
And
on three.
you're good. And so what about you, Arthur? What do you use software wise?
Arthur is a Logic user.
Oh, you
I-
are Logic.
Yeah, I started with Logic Pro 9. I
Mhm.
did 9 for a couple of years, and then I upgraded to X. And like, it's an amazing program. It really
I
is.
love it.
Every time I
Yeah.
produce, I learn something new about it. Like, there's
Yeah.
so much stuff to learn about Logic X. Like, don't expect to learn this stuff within a year. Like, I've been using Logic Pro X for the last, or Logic Pro in general. I've been using Logic Pro since grade 10. You know, and I'm already I'm 27, and I finished university 2 years ago. You know, so do the math. Like, I've been using this thing for years, and like every time I make a beat, I learn something new about it, and that's what makes me always want to sit down at Logic Pro X. Is like, what am I gonna learn today? What's something new that I can integrate in my beats that I haven't done before?
Yeah, and it's like you have a new. I love it. Mike's probably like, "Oh, great, man." I'm like here with two Logic lovers, like you know. But yeah, me too. Like I have Ableton Live. I have Logic. I love Ableton Live for what it does. If I'm using the Launchpad, I'm obviously going to use Ableton Live. But or doing live performance stuff, I'm going to use Ableton Live. But Logic, I don't have the update yet. But even then, like you learn so much new stuff every time you go to it, and whether it's not something exactly new, you might see a new perspective, or even, just for me, the most recent one was binaural panning. So just getting super into that, where it's like, you have all the stuff around here, and I'm just like, I was so into that, like I
That's
still am,
something
but
I focus on a lot.
few months ago, and I started using it a lot more. I knew about it, but I wasn't actually applying it as much. Now I apply it all the time, and I'm like, so when I figured that out, I'm like, oh, I don't know why I wasn't doing this. This is so awesome. And this is after years of
Yeah.
of
That's the
using
great
Logic.
thing with these programs too, is they work, at least most of them that I know of, work the same way as, say, like a phone, where you buy the program once and then every year you got a new update, right? A new OS. And a lot of times even the big guys are learning new stuff, new things that have been included in the software, cool techniques, ideas, things that become easier to do. So you're always learning, and you should never stop learning.
Yeah. And I think with production, that's a great point to make, and something that I just wanted to touch on really quickly before we get to wrapping up. I know there's a lot, so much we can keep on going on about this stuff forever, but this is already a lot of information here. But one thing that I did want to mention, unless the thought slips away from me as well, what were we talking about?
Logic and using the updating the software.
Yes, okay, exactly. So updating the software. The one thing that I wanted to mention today that is very different from a music producer's perspective when you're using a DAW, like Pro Tools, Logic, Ableton, Bitwig, Reason, any of those. The thing is that when you're learning an instrument, for example, guitar, you can only unlock as much as you can physically do. So I can't go and do crazy, guitar shredding or play a sonata if I can't even play a C chord. I got to just learn how to play one string and make it sound good. Then maybe I can play one chord.
Yeah.
And that all takes months and years. The problem is, or not the problem, but the difference with using a DAW is everything's unlocked and you got to kind of go and figure it out. But with music, you start here and you can slowly expand because your physical capabilities won't get you there.
Oh
As
yeah.
opposed to when you're using the DAW, you have every single capability that everyone else has, but it's how much of that do you understand and know how to use. So
Not to mention you don't got to learn an instrument or anything, because if you want, say, a saxophone in your song, you just go and find a saxophone sample or a VST that sounds like a saxophone and just play it out.
Okay, now where are we gonna find these samples of these saxophones? You can go and subscribe to splice.com. So you can basically buy royalty-free samples for credits, and that's where you can find these samples. Because a lot of people, they're gonna be like, "Where am I gonna find these samples?" If you go on YouTube, you're gonna steal something that is not yours, not your property, and then we're gonna get into copyright laws.
That being said, though, you have guys like Skrillex, who, his big song, right at the drop is that
oh
little
my
kid going,
god,
"Oh my god!" And that's just
Yeah.
a kid from YouTube who won the cup stacking tournament, and he got like the world record, and you went, "Oh my god!" So samples, yes, he's right. Copyright can hit you with that, but if you take that sample and you tweak it, or it's a sample that's not a song, just a sample of, say, a kid talking, then you can work around that.
There's
right?
some gray areas about that.
So
yeah,
Arthur,
or the main thing with samples, it's really tough, and this is actually I'm really happy we got on this point. So samples, guys, for anybody who doesn't know, I'm sure a lot of you do if you're watching the producer edition, but what is a sample?
it's essentially a sound that you either find or you make that you put into your production in some way, whether that's a sample of a kick drum, a sample of a vocal. You can have samples of like a certain sound.
Saxophone solos.
Yeah. And so that's exactly it. And so the reason for some of you thinking, oh, why is it called a sample? Well, let's say if any of you have been to Costco, you go there, what do you go there for? You go there and you get a little free sample, right? It's a little bit of something. That's what a lot of these samples are. They can be bigger little bits or smaller little bits, but a sample is not usually a full song done for you. That's not a sample. A sample is a piece of something that you can then use to make something bigger. And that's why it's called a sample. Because, for example, a saxophone sample, what a lot of people will do, the way these samples come about is a saxophone is meticulously recorded. So there's someone playing a saxophone and they play that note at different velocities or different volumes. And that may be a particular saxophone that was recorded, which you can then use samples of to build your own saxophone part. They do this with a lot of really good pianos, really good instruments that may be inaccessible every day. They'll make a sample pack of that particular instrument. But you can also get samples electronically or digitally or through digitally made
Yeah,
sounds
so Arthur
as well.
mentioned Splice, which is a good service, but you got to pay for that. There's also a lot of free ones out there. And the only thing I would say about things like Splice, for example, is to keep in mind that your access to those samples, everyone else has the same access, right? So a lot of times I will recognize samples in a song, a lesser known song that I've heard in other ones as well. So when using those samples, at least from my own experience and my own suggestion, is to never use the sample as is, but to change it in some way. Whether that's making it unrecognizable or just adding some effects to change it up or pitching it up and down. Do something unique to it, do something different to it so that there's less of a chance that someone else is going to have, that same sound that you have. And that's kind of going back to before We were talking about, the samples available in your DAW. Don't get too wrapped up about that, but whenever you can, try to really be creative by not just using the sample as is, but tweaking it in some way.
Mhm.
That's
That's a
just
very
my sense for that.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and you can see that there's so many different perspectives here, right? Even just with three of us, like it's really interesting because that's I can see that that's something that's very you're very focused on, Mike. Like, taking something and I completely agree. Tweaking that thing so that you change it so that it's not when you hear that sample from Splice, it's not going to sound like the exact same as, the other person who used it without doing anything to
Yeah,
it. That's a very good point. And
probably the best producer I could think of for that is Kanye West. And
mhm,
he's actually been sued countless times for using samples that weren't or that were copywritten. And
mhm,
he's the kind of guy who obviously can just pay those off and deal with it. But that's a guy, if you want to get into sampling or at least understand sampling more, look into some of his music and more so the breakdowns, right?
yeah,
There's
yeah,
websites out there called like Who Sampled Who, which you can look up and actually see those popular songs that you love. A lot of them have old samples from songs in the 70s, 80s, 60s. And when you kind of listen to the original and then listen to what that producer did with that sample, could as well give you a lot of insight to what's possible. Daft Punk, if you want to go more into the electronic side of things, Daft Punk do a lot of sampling as well.
mm.
There's like a lot where if you sample something that's more than 100 years old, you don't have to worry about
Oh yeah,
copyright.
there's
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
So that's where
but
you get into
You want
you'll
to sample
understand all of that
classical.
as
You want to
you
sample classical music. I mean, you
you're
basically
good to go. Yeah, you're good to
go
go,
then.
right?
as
So
music. Yeah,
yeah, because it becomes part of royalty. It's now public domain is the word.
yeah.
So you have access to really, really old stuff. The thing is, I would just mention this to hip hop producers specifically who are very sample heavy because that is a part of it. People use those
Hip
MPCs.
hop is
They
very sample heavy.
it's super sample heavy, and a lot of times you may feel right now that your beats don't sound as good because you don't have access to sampling, at least to in a professional level. What happens is if you want to sample something and make a song and keep it on your laptop, by all means. You want to show a few friends, by all means. But as soon as you put it into the public and start selling it, that's illegal. That's copyright infringement. So
You're
unless you
making
get
money off of it.
yeah, exactly. Unless and when you're making money off of it and you're selling this product, that even if you want to put it on YouTube or on SoundCloud for free, and you credit the proper people that you have to credit, you're gonna get away with it. But as soon as you start selling it and you don't have copyright clearance, you're gonna get into trouble. So before you do any of that, see if you can actually clear the sample. It's gonna be very difficult. I'm telling you right now. So if you can do it, great on you. But if you can't, that is going to be a little bit out of access commercially in terms of making money for the next little while. So, what I would say is what Mike is saying about taking something royalty free and stretching it, tweaking it, changing it so that you can make it your own is probably the best way to go. And when you do get to a point that you're allowed to use samples and you can clear them, then you're going to be that much better with that because you already know how to make all these adjustments and edits and changes to make it more you.
Yeah.
Um,
And to
yeah,
circle back to what we were talking about in the beginning is whenever you can, or if you're struggling to find like that right sound, make it yourself.
yeah,
You got a way to make it yourself. And that way you don't got to deal with copyright laws and stuff because that's your sample. You made that.
yeah.
There's Skrillex, just to kind of give an example. There was Justin Bieber's Sorry. That was a big song a few years ago. That was
Mhm.
made by Skrillex. And that vocal kind of chop, I forget who it was, but some artist hit them with a copyright law because they thought she was sampled, sounded exactly the same. So Skrillex came on Instagram and broke down and showed how he took Bieber's voice and then pitched it up a lot higher, and that became that line, and it just happened to sound very similar. So like I said, whenever you can, make your own samples so that even if you end up sounding like someone else, uh, you got like nothing can happen to you because that's your sample. You made that.
Yeah, exactly. That's a very good point. Like, let's say like YouTube covers, for example, right? If I'm going to release a cover on YouTube, which I have a few out, if I use the actual artist's recordings or tracks or stems, which are part of their songs, that's not going to be allowed. But if I recreate all these things by myself, there's no copyright issue because I'm not using the actual recording. The song is still not owned by me just because I made everything, but now the recording, the infringement of using a recording without permission is not happening um, because I'm not using anybody else's samples and using anybody else's material. So, um, very good point. But um, yeah, make your own sounds. The main thing is to get started, actually do it, and you're going to uncover so much by actually going through the process, regardless of what software you're using, regardless of what style of music you're making. The main thing is actually doing it and seek out resources like YouTube, like Splice,
It's all
and
out there for you to get. You just got to look for it.
that's it. That's it. Well, I think that concludes today's session. We can keep on talking about this forever and nerding out. I don't want to stop, but I think this has been a really great place to leave it at for you guys so far. To take what you can from this and apply it to your own journey. Do you guys have any last words of advice or wisdom for our viewers?
Just go out and do it, and good luck. All the best. We've been doing it for years, so just do it for the passion of it, and
Practice
everything else
makes
will come.
perfect.
Practice makes perfect too.
That's it. Practice makes perfect, and just
Do it
do
every
it.
day.
Every day. That's it. And I'm just going to echo what they said. The more you do it, the more you're going to learn. Just go out and actually do it. And you're going to make mistakes, but those mistakes are going to actually be the biggest points of learning for you. When you go through this, it's not all going to be smooth sailing. It's not all going to be rewarding, but that's what's going to ultimately make it a super rewarding experience and one that you can continue to grow at and learn. You're never going to stop learning, and you can never learn all there is to know about music or production or even these DAWs for that matter. So get started. That's a good New Year's resolution for all of you to
There
make
you
that
go.
change and grow as the musicians, artists, producers, and engineers that you want to be. For now, this has been Artists Empowering Artists, presented to you, rather, by Youth for Change. My name is Neel Dani, and it's been a pleasure to be here hanging out with Misiu, aka DJ Magic Mike, and Arthur Boomin. Where can we check out any music from you guys? I know, Mike, you're releasing something
YouTube,
pretty soon.
SoundCloud, and Spotify.
SoundCloud and Spotify, Arthur Boomin,
YouTube.
and YouTube, Arthur Boomin. And how about you, Mike?
And for me as well, I'm releasing on SoundCloud first, but same thing. Everything's going to be on Spotify. Mishu is just Misiu.
Awesome. So if you want to check out his production stuff, go to Mishu, Misiu. If you want to get more on his DJ bandwagon, then go check out DJ Magic Mike. And once all this is over, he can dazzle you with his DJ
Yeah, I can't
skills.
wait.
Yeah. We're all waiting to take the masks off and get back into the world, But for now, use the resources you have, use the technology you have, and we hope to see you all in person in the future. But for now, all the best for the holidays, all the best for the new year, and we'll see you real soon.
Bye.